Why does God allow suffering? The Book of Job explained. There is a question that spans the entire history of humanity, without exception, a question that does not depend on culture, age, or religion. If God is all-powerful and absolutely good, why is the world still so full of suffering? Why do honest people face unexpected losses? Why do entire families suddenly fall apart? And why, so often, just when someone tries to live uprightly, does life seem to crumble? At some point in life, almost all of us have felt this internal conflict, a kind of silence that arises when reality does not seem to make sense. And in that moment, the most common answers emerge. Some say it is a test. Others claim that God knows what He is doing. And there are still those who say everything happens for a reason. But when the pain is real, these answers do not always bring relief. In fact, they often sound distant, almost empty, as if they cannot reach what the person is truly going through. Because when someone is truly suffering, it is not theory that brings peace, it is meaning. And this is exactly where this video begins. In the next few minutes, we're going to dive into one of the deepest stories ever recorded about human suffering, the Book of Job. A text that does not avoid difficult questions, does not disguise pain, and does not offer easy answers. And perhaps the most surprising thing of all is this. The answer that appears at the end is not the one most people expect. What lies behind Job's suffering is not just an ancient story, but a mirror of the human experience to this day. And when this is truly understood, the way you view your own crises can change completely. If you are someone who seeks to understand the deepest mysteries of faith and wants to shield your heart for stormy days, become part of our community. Tap the subscribe button and walk with us in search of true wisdom. If we want to understand Job's suffering, we must first understand who he was, because so often it is not the pain itself that makes a story extraordinary, but the person who experiences it. The Book of Job begins by describing a man who seemed to represent everything most people search for in life. The Bible presents him as blameless and upright, one who feared God and shunned evil. This description is important. It does not intend to portray a perfect man, but someone who had built his existence on solid principles. Job understood that wealth could be conquered, respect could be earned, and power could be accumulated. But he also knew that a person's true value lay in their character. In a world where so many measure life by what they possess, Job was recognized primarily by the way he lived. His prosperity was a consequence of his journey, not the foundation of his identity. Still, his life was, in human eyes, an example of fullness. He had a large family, many possessions, stability, and recognition. He was someone who had seen years of labor bear fruit. His home represented what we call security. And perhaps this is exactly where the story begins to touch our own reality. All of us, in some way, build an idea of security. Some find it in family, others in their profession. Some place their trust in health. Others believe that the future is guaranteed by the achievements accumulated over the years. Building is part of human nature. The problem is that so often we confuse what we build with who we truly are. And it is precisely this difference that life sooner or later forces us to see. Without any warning, everything began to change. There were no signs. There was no time to prepare. While an apparently ordinary day went on, a messenger arrived, bringing news that part of his possessions had been destroyed. Soon after, another came, and then another. Each piece of news was heavier than the last. His estate was vanishing. His servants were dying. What had taken decades to build seemed to crumble in a matter of hours. Then came the news that no amount of wealth could compensate for. His children were dead. In a single instant, the house full of life became a place of silence. There is no estate capable of filling a void like that, but the deconstruction was not yet over. Shortly after, Job's own body was struck by a painful disease. Sores covered his skin. Pain became his constant companion. The once admired man came to experience isolation, fragility, and helplessness. And there is a detail that makes this entire narrative deeply human. Job received no explanations. He did not know there was an invisible reality beyond the events. He only contemplated the facts before him. And like any human being, he tried to find meaning in something that seemed to have no logic at all. Perhaps this is the reason why his story has crossed millennia without losing its strength. Because it does not only speak of a man who lost everything. It speaks of the universal experience of discovering that life cannot be completely controlled. There are moments when our plans stop answering the most important questions. There are moments when our logic is no longer enough to interpret what we are experiencing. And it is precisely in these moments that a question even deeper than "why did this happen?" arises. Who do I continue to be when everything that sustained my life disappears? This is Job's true crisis, and perhaps it is ours too, because before revealing any answer about suffering, the book of Job does something much more uncomfortable. It invites us to discover where the foundation of our existence truly lies. It is only after this deconstruction that the deepest part of the story begins to be revealed. Carrying this message of comfort and hope to those who are suffering in silence is our mission. By subscribing, you do not just follow our journey, but you become an active part of this chain of faith. Join us so that more lives can be reached. When suffering arrives, it does not only transform the life of the one who suffers, it also reveals the way the people around them view the world. Perhaps one of Job's greatest pains was not just losing his possessions, his family, or his health. It was realizing that those who should have helped him carry the weight of his pain believed he was responsible for all of it. 3 friends came to visit him: Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar. In the beginning, they did exactly what any true friend should do. They sat down beside Job. They remained in silence. For 7 days, they did not say a single word. And perhaps this is one of the most beautiful gestures recorded in Scripture, because there are pains in the face of which silence is worth more than any explanation. Not all suffering needs an immediate answer. Sometimes, presence comforts more than arguments. But when they decided to speak, something changed completely. They began to defend an idea that seemed perfectly logical, an idea so logical that even today millions of people believe in it. If God is just, then good people receive blessings, and bad people receive suffering. Therefore, if someone is facing such a great tragedy, there can only be one conclusion. Somewhere, this person sinned. Perhaps they hid a secret sin. Perhaps they had committed some injustice. Perhaps they were reaping what they sowed. It was an extremely organized way of thinking. Everything seemed to make sense. To them, the universe functioned like a great moral scale. Good deeds produced prosperity. Bad deeds produced suffering. A simple equation, comfortable, predictable, and precisely because of that, seductive, because we all like to believe that we can explain reality. This way of thinking is known today by a name well known to Bible scholars. It is the so-called theology of retribution. The idea that God immediately rewards the righteous and immediately punishes the wicked. At first glance, this logic even seems to have a foundation. After all, the Bible truly teaches that our choices have consequences. Those who live in violence often reap violence. Those who cultivate selfishness usually destroy their relationships. Those who sow dishonesty find it hard to build trust. This is true, but Job's friends went a step further. They turned a partial truth into an absolute rule, and that is exactly where the error is born, because human reality is much more complex than simple formulas can explain. Job listened to each argument attentively, but there was something he could not accept. He knew who he was. He knew he was not perfect. He never claimed to be. He recognized his limitations like any human being, but he also knew he had not committed any sin capable of explaining that complete destruction. His conscience was not perfect, but it was sincere. Therefore, Job begins to do something that few people have the courage to do. He takes his questions directly to God. He does not abandon his faith. He does not deny the existence of the Creator, but he also does not pretend to understand what he does not understand. He laments, he weeps, he questions, he expresses his anguish, and at times, his words even seem harsh. This reveals something deeply human. True faith does not eliminate questions. It gives us the courage to take them to God. There is a huge difference between abandoning faith and wrestling within it. Job chose to remain, even without answers. Meanwhile, his friends insisted on the same conclusion. Admit your mistake, confess your sin, repent, and God will restore your life. Notice how this thought remains present to this day. When someone faces a serious illness, someone quickly asks, "Was there a lack of faith?" When a family goes through a crisis, someone asserts, "There must be some hidden sin." When a business goes bankrupt, when a marriage ends, when a tragedy strikes, there is always someone willing to quickly explain what they have never lived. Perhaps it is because admitting that suffering can reach anyone makes us insecure. It is more comfortable to believe that tragedy always happens to others for some specific reason, because if we find a cause for every pain, we create the illusion that we can avoid it. But life rarely works that way. The book of Job dismantles this false sense of control. It forces us to recognize that there are events that exceed our capacity for explanation. This does not mean that God is unjust. It only means that our understanding is limited. There is a huge difference between saying that God is just and asserting that we can always understand His justice. They are completely different things. Perhaps one of the greatest lessons of this book is this: nem toda prosperidade é aprovação, nem todo sofrimento é condenação. There are deeply generous people who face immense pain, and there are cruel people who, for some time, seem to live without any consequences. This reality is uncomfortable. But you only have to look around to realize that it exists. The book of Job itself prevents us from making hasty judgments. It teaches us that someone's pain should never be interpreted as a moral sentence. Because we see only a small fragment of the story, God sees the whole. How many times has someone entered a church smiling while carrying a suffering that no one imagined? How many times have we judged a person without knowing the silent battle they face? How many times do we offer answers when what the other person truly needed was just companionship? Perhaps that is why the 7 days of silence from Job's friends were wiser than all the speeches that came after. When they decided to explain the suffering, they stopped comforting. They traded compassion for theory. And this remains one of the greatest risks of spirituality, using ready-made answers to avoid the discomfort of questions. The book of Job invites us to a different path. Before trying to explain someone's pain, learn to respect it. Before looking for culprits, recognize the limits of your own understanding. And before asserting that you know exactly what God is doing, remember that not even the most upright man of his generation could immediately understand the paths through which he was being led. Because some of God's greatest lessons are not born when we finally find all the answers. They begin precisely when we abandon the pretense of explaining everything. And it is exactly at this point that the book of Job prepares the most surprising moment of the entire narrative. Up to this point, we have heard only human voices. But soon, it will be God Himself who breaks the silence. If this reflection is bringing peace to your heart, subscribe to continue receiving this wisdom. After so many chapters marked by questions, laments, and debates, what the reader had been waiting for since the beginning of the story finally happens. God speaks. During all this time, Job had asked for only one thing: an answer, not wealth, not health, not an easy life. He wanted to understand. He wanted to know why all of that had happened. Perhaps this is also the deepest desire of anyone who goes through a great pain. We do not always seek an immediate solution. Often what we truly want is for the experience to make sense, and then when the silence seemed final, God answers, but not in the way anyone expected. The text says that the Lord spoke to Job out of a whirlwind. The image is powerful. The whirlwind represents a reality that exceeds human control. It cannot be contained. It cannot be predicted. It cannot be tamed, just like many events in life itself. And then begins one of the most impressive speeches in all of biblical literature. Curiously, God does not begin by saying, "Job, let me explain why you suffered." He also does not reveal the conversation that had taken place at the beginning of the book. He does not mention the accuser. He does not present a detailed justification. He does not offer the explanation that any reader imagined finding. Instead, God begins to ask questions. Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Who determined its measurements? Who commands the sun to rise every morning? Can you control the movement of the stars? Do you know the paths of the wind? Who feeds the wild animals when no human being is looking? Question after question. Not because God did not know the answers, but because Job needed to realize something that had become invisible to him. During his pain, all of reality had been reduced to a single question: why? It was a legitimate question, but there was another even deeper question. Who is God? Because so often when we suffer, our worldview shrinks. All of our attention is focused on what we lost, on what we do not understand, on what we wish were different. Without realizing it, we begin to see God only through the lens of our own pain. And God then broadens Job's horizon once again. He invites him to look at a reality infinitely larger than his own experience. The universe, the mountains, the oceans, the constellations, the cycles of nature, life that flourishes in places where no human being has ever been. It is as if God were saying, there is an order sustaining creation every day, even when you cannot perceive it. Then the speech reaches an even more surprising point. God describes gigantic creatures known as Behemoth and Leviathan. For centuries, scholars have discussed exactly what these beings represent. Some understand them to be real animals described in poetic language. Others see them as symbols of the chaotic forces of creation. Regardless of the interpretation, the message remains the same. There are powers in creation that completely exceed human capacity to control. No man can domesticate Leviathan. No human being governs Behemoth, but God governs. What seems threatening to us remains under his dominion for God. This image goes far beyond those animals. It speaks of existence itself. There are dimensions of reality that escape our understanding. There are forces we cannot control. There are events we will never be able to organize into a perfect explanation. And this leads us to the center of the divine response. Notice that God does not answer Job's question with an explanation. He answers by revealing who he is. At first glance, this may seem frustrating, but perhaps it is exactly the answer Job needed most, because an explanation would solve only that specific suffering. knowing God's character would change the way he faced any suffering. That is a huge difference. We usually believe that peace is born when we finally understand everything. The Bible proposes another possibility. Peace can be born when we learn whom to trust, even without understanding everything. It is like a child crossing a forest during the night. She does not know the path. She does not understand the direction. She does not know what lies ahead. But she keeps walking because she holds her Father's hand. Trust does not eliminate the unknown. It only makes it possible to cross it. Perhaps that is exactly what God was teaching Job. If you cannot fully understand even the visible universe, how do you expect to understand the full depth of my justice, my wisdom, and my purposes? It is not a matter of humiliation, much less an invitation to abandon questions. It is an invitation to humility. There is a difference between saying there is no answer and recognizing my understanding has limits. We live in an era that values control. We want to predict the future, calculate risks, explain behaviors, find a reason for absolutely everything. But the book of Job reminds us of a truth that remains deeply relevant today. Not everything that is true fits within our capacity of understanding. There are mysteries that are not a defect of faith. They are a natural consequence of the distance between the human mind and the infinite wisdom of God. At the end of that extraordinary encounter, something changed inside Job. Curiously, his circumstances had not yet been restored. His family had not yet returned. His wealth did not yet exist. His external situation remained practically the same. But his way of seeing God had been transformed. And when that happens, even suffering comes to occupy a different place within our story. Because sometimes the greatest answer God offers is not an explanation for the pain. It is a revelation of his greatness. And when this greatness is contemplated, we realize that the most important question was never just, why am I suffering? Perhaps it is, can I trust God even when I do not understand the path through which he is leading me? It is precisely from this silent answer that the true outcome of the book of Job is born. God's silence does not mean absence. It is often an invitation to listen more closely. If you want to learn to find answers in the quietness, subscribe to the channel and walk with us. After all that has been said, after all the questions, after God's silence and the revelation of his greatness, Job's story moves toward its conclusion. But not immediately. The Bible does not present restoration as a simple, automatic happy ending, as if everything could be easily reorganized. There is a time between understanding and restoration, a time when something has already changed on the inside, but has not yet changed on the outside. And it is in this space that Job begins to be transformed definitively. He does not receive all the answers. He does not discover all the reasons. He does not have full access to what happened behind the scenes of his pain, but he receives something that, in a way, is even deeper. He receives a new perception of God. And then he says one of the most striking sentences in the entire book. My ears had heard of you, but now my eyes have seen you. This is not just a poetic phrase. It is the description of an inner change. Before, Job had a faith based on tradition, on knowledge, on what he had learned about God. Now, his faith becomes pierced by experience. Not because he finally understood everything, but because he was led to a deeper level of trust. And it is important to realize something here. Job's restoration does not begin first with the change of his story. It begins with the change of his vision. Only after this is his external life also restored. This does not mean that all pain will be followed by a visible restitution like Job's. The book itself does not promise this automatically, but it reveals something more essential. There is a transformation that can happen even when circumstances have not yet changed. And this transformation changes everything. At the end of the story, Job is restored. His life is reorganized. His family is rebuilt. His stability exists once again. But the most important point is not just in what he recovers. It is in what he learns to see. And here the book stops being just an ancient narrative and becomes a mirror for the present. Because at some point in life, all of us are led to cross questions that do not have simple answers. Not all suffering will be clearly explained. Not every loss will be accompanied by an immediate understanding. Not all pain will make sense within our logic. And perhaps this is one of the hardest lessons to accept. We were not called to understand everything. We were called to go through everything with faith. Suffering in the book of Job is not presented as a mathematical problem, waiting for a perfect solution. It is presented as a human reality within a world that is larger than our capacity of interpretation. And this completely changes the way we deal with pain. Because when we believe we need to understand everything to trust, we end up trapped inside the question itself. But when we learn that trust can exist even without explanation, something opens up inside us. It is not about ignoring the pain, nor about romanticizing suffering, but of recognizing that the absence of answers does not mean the absence of God. What the book of Job teaches us, in the end, is deeply simple, and at the same time, extremely difficult to live. We will not always know the why, but even so, we can know in whom. And this changes everything, because the why can fail. Circumstances can remain confusing. Answers may never come completely. But God's character remains. And it is at this point that the story stops being just about Job and becomes about all of us, about how we react when life loses predictability, about what we do when control slips out of our hands, and about where we place our trust when understanding is no longer enough. Perhaps the greatest spiritual maturity is not in having all the answers, but in remaining standing, even when they do not exist. And this is exactly what the book of Job invites us to learn. Mature faith is not that which avoids suffering, but that which remains standing during it. If you are not satisfied with shallow answers and want to build an unshakable spirituality, subscribe now. This channel is your space for search and depth. If you made it this far, it is because, in some way, this is not just a story to you. There is a deeper restlessness, a search that goes beyond quick explanations, a need to understand life at a level that does not fit into the superficial answers we normally hear. And perhaps this says something important. Not everyone is willing to remain when the questions get difficult. Not everyone continues when the answers are not immediate. But you remained until here, and this reveals something about the kind of journey you are looking for. The book of Job does not offer simple solutions, and perhaps life does not either, but it leads us to something more solid than quick explanations, a faith that does not depend on understanding everything to keep walking. If this kind of reflection makes sense to you, if you feel you need a deeper vision of the scriptures and of life, without shortcuts, without easy answers, but with truth and discernment, then this is exactly the space we built here. On this channel, we do not treat faith as a set of ready-made phrases. We seek to understand the scriptures in depth, and also to look at life with the same seriousness with which it confronts us, without simplifying suffering, without reducing God to formulas, but trying to see meaning where most only repeat quick explanations. If you want to continue this journey of wisdom and strengthen a faith that thinks, reflects, and matures, then subscribe to the channel now. Turn on notifications and follow along with us in the next studies, because some questions are not resolved in a single video. They are understood over the course of a walk. Just as Job's story did not end in the ashes, Your current pain will not be your end either. To continue feeding your soul with deep studies like this, subscribe to the channel. See you in the next video.